Hello everyone, welcome to an episode that will deal with various genres that we study within English literature. In this unit, we will learn about what is genres, what are the different genres, and also study in detail these different genres. In order to understand the importance of this topic within English literature, an attempt will be made to discuss it intensively. I am Sakshi Mandwal and our subject expert today is Vasundhara Gautam. In the earlier episodes, we have discussed the grammatical components of English. We have discussed the history of English literature. Here we will study the genres in detail. In today's session, we will be going to cover the definition of genres, the different genres of English literature, the origin and development of each genre, main features of these genres, the important figures who gave popularity to these genres, the overall contribution of genres to the study of literature. This is an important fact of knowledge that to study literature we need to have the knowledge of its various genres. This knowledge can only be gathered if we study the meaning of genres and their respective developments. In the case of English literature too, it is necessary to get an idea about its various constituent genres, the phases of development and its gradual spread, the authors who made these genres famous, and how these genres led to the knowledge of English literature. These genres with their respective histories show us how literatures as a whole have come down to us and where it started from. So in this unit, we would learn about genres of English literature and its development through the periods of English literature. To begin with, therefore, we need to know what we mean by the word genre. What is genres? Genre is a literary type and the unit of knowledge within a subject, or genres can be referred to the various components of a field of study. For example, within English literature, poetry, drama, fiction, non-fiction, all are genres. They are different components of English literature. History of English literature. English literature is a vast field of study. In this unit, we will learn about the different components or types within the study of English literature. Our focus would be in studying and analyzing in detail the three different genres. They are as following: poetry, drama, and fiction. To begin with the discussion on poetry, let us look at the earliest period of English literature, which is the Old English or the Anglo-Saxon period. English was not a language that had fully developed by then, and poetry as a branch was mostly considered as verses. The heroic spirit of that period was expressed through the verses of minstrels who used to sing their compositions in the courts of different kings. The earliest extant versions of poetry can be found in the writings of Cædmon, who was an illiterate herdsman. He used to compose verses around Christian themes, local folklore, and the heroes of the contemporary period. The great epic Beowulf was written in the form of verses. Some other good poetry that had been written in that period were The Dream of the Root in 700 AD, Battle of Brunanburh in 937 AD, and the Battle of Maldon in 991 AD. The following period, which is known as the Middle English or the Anglo-Norman period, saw the invasion of the French people through the Norman conquest of 1066. For this reason, the study and influence of French language increased. Major works of the 13th century started using the Norman language, and works like Lyman's Brut was written in the same language. It was towards the beginning of the 14th century that English started gaining prominence through the influence of others' languages was fairly visible. Authors like William Langland, Geoffrey Chaucer, and John Gower wrote poetry in English with some borrowings from other languages. Langland's Piers, the Plowman, Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales, and Gower's Confessio Amantis are some of the best early poems written in English. The Elizabethan period. The Elizabethan period, which comes after the Middle English period, is regarded as the great times of English drama. The Elizabethan period that lasted from 1558 to 1603 gave birth to great poets like Thomas Yat, Edmund Spenser, Philip Sidney, Walter Raleigh, and few others. William Shakespeare, though was well known as a dramatist, was a great poet too. Thomas Yard first introduced the sonnet form in English. Spenser's Faerie Queen is one of the most famous poetic epic. Sidney's sonnet sequence, Astrophel and Stella, has earned him a great repute. Shakespeare wrote 154 sonnets, which placed him amongst the ranks of great poets. The Jacobean period also produced some great poets. The most remarkable of them was John Donne, who is also regarded as the father of the metaphysical school of poetry. He wrote poetry that was unconventional in nature. He was the poetic father figure for many poets like George Herbert, Andrew Marvell, Thomas Traherne, Richard Crashaw, and many others. During the rule of King Charles I in the 16th century over England, there were a group of poets who were called the Cavaliers, as they wrote poems in praise of the king. The Cavaliers included poets like John Suckling, who were part of the court of Charles I. Following them in the 17th century, we find the greatest epic poet of English, John Milton. Born in 1608, Milton is world famous for his epic poem Paradise Lost, which speaks about the triumph of good over evil. It is a poem that has influenced many later generations. His other poems include L'Allegro, Tu Penseroso, Samson Agonizes, Lycidas, and Paradise Regained. During the later half of the 17th century and the early half of 18th century, the time that mostly covered the neoclassical period and age of sensibility, satire became a popular medium of poetic expression. Poets like John Dryden, Alexander Pope, Jonathan Swift, Samuel Johnson all had written poetic satires. John Dryden's famous poems, which are satiric in nature, include Absalom and Achitophel, 1681, Meg Flecknoe, 1682, and The Hind and Panther, 1687. Alexander Pope was another great poet who wrote satires like The Rape of the Lock, 1712, and The Dunciad, 1729. Samuel Johnson's London and The Vanity of Human Wishes are also regarded as the best poetical satires ever written. The later half of the 18th century witnessed the rise of poets who were writing on simple, rural, romantic themes and also on matters of spirituality. Most famous amongst them was William Blake, whose songs of innocence, songs of experience and marriage, of heaven and hell dealt with themes of good and evil. Others notable poets of the same times include Thomas Gray, George Crabbe, Robert Burns, and few others. In the year of 1798, poets William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge published the Romantic Manifesto that began a new era of great poetry. William Wordsworth and Coleridge wrote many poems like The Daffodils, The Solitary Reaper, The Preludes, Kubla Khan, Christabel, Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and many others. Besides them, poets like John Keats, P.B. Shelley, and Lord Byron had composed some immortal poetry. Keats' Ode to a Nightingale and Ode on a Grecian Urn are very popular even today. Shelley's Ode to the West Wind, To a Skylark, Prometheus Unbound, The Cloud, and others have earned him a worldwide fame. Lord Byron, another famous romantic poet, is known for his poem Don Juan. The Victorian period that began with the ascension of Queen Victoria to the throne of England saw the rise and popularity of English novels. The most prominent poet of this period was Lord Alfred Tennyson, who was famous for poems like In Memoriam, The Lotus Eaters, Crossing the Bar, and many others. Besides him, other famous poets included Robert Browning and Matthew Arnold, who wrote some great poems like My Last Duchess, Porphyria's Lover, and Dover Beach. In the later half of the same period, a group of painters and artists came together and formed a brotherhood. They were known as the Pre-Raphaelites. The members who were great poets included D.G. Rossetti, Christina Rossetti, William Morris, Swinburne, and others. They wrote some good poetry like The Blessed Damozel, Goblin Market, and other poems, and The Well at the World's End. Rapid changes were witnessed with the end of the Victorian period and the beginning of the modern period. The society became more diversified, and the two world wars had given a huge jolt to England as a society and nation. Some great poets who wrote in the modern period were W.B. Yeats, T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, W.H. Auden, Siegfried Sassoon, Edmund Blunden, Elizabeth Jennings, Ted Hughes, Sylvia Plath, and many others. W.B. Yeats was an Irish-born poet who had written poems like Sailing to Byzantium, The Lake Isle of Innisfree, Easter 1916. He wrote on themes of Irish nationalism, freedom, and the beauty of women. T.S. Eliot was another legendary modernist poet whose magnum opus was The Wasteland. Other poems include The Hollow Men, Preludes, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, Ash Wednesday. W.H. Auden was a poet who is well remembered for The Shield of Achiles, The Funeral Blues, and others. Siegfried Sassoon was a war poet who wrote about the horrors of the war and human condition. Sylvia Plath was a major female poet of the modern period. Her famous poetry collections are the Colossus and Other Poems and Aerial Poems. She opened a new branch of poetry through her style of writing. It came to be known as confessional poetry. After the discussion on English poetry and its history, we will now discuss English drama that has come down to us in the modern times. The earliest instances of English drama can be traced back to the days of miracle and mystery plays of the Middle English or the Anglo-Norman period. Miracle plays mostly consisted of stories from the Bible, and mystery plays were adaptations of lives of various saints. There were different cycles of plays, and the actors would visit from region to region to show their performance. The notable cycles were named as the York Cycle and Chester Cycle. Some of the earliest produced dramas that dealt with the themes of resurrection, crucifixion, and others. The earliest surviving morality plays are The Castle of Perseverance and Every Man. They had a religious tone, and the characters within such plays were mostly abstractions of human personalities. They were often allegorical in nature and dealt with ideas of vice and virtue. The Castle of Perseverance, which is roughly dated around 1425, has been depicted as a story involving four daughters of God, mercy, peace, truth, and righteousness, who debate over the important things in life, which includes characters like good, bad, greedy, treachery, and others. The others play Every Man also deals with issues of religious life and talks about the Christian doctrine of life. Renaissance, Elizabethan and Jacobean period. After a series of early ventures into playwriting, which mostly dealt with religious themes, the Renaissance was a time that is seen as a great time of playwriting. It was in this period that the world got its greatest playwright in the form of William Shakespeare. During the rule of Elizabeth I, 1558 to 1603, and James I, 1603 to 1625, over the throne of England, playwriting became a big affair. Plays were broadly divided into two categories during this time: tragedies and comedies. The earliest tragedy in the history of English drama is Gorboduc, 1561, written by Sackville and Norton. The earliest comedy was that of Nicholas Udall, who had written Ralph Roister Doister, 1552. There were numerous playwrights who were writing during this time. There was a group of dramatists known as the University Whist, as they had all graduated from the universities of Oxford and Cambridge and had written great plays. This group included people like Christopher Marlowe, Thomas Kyd, Thomas Nash, George Peele, Robert Greene, John Lyly. Marlowe is hailed as a great dramatist and is considered to be the closest rival of Shakespeare. He is famous for plays like Tamburlaine the Great, Dr. Faustus, Edward II, Jew of Malta, and others. The heroes of his plays are humans who begin as normal human beings, but gradually they develop their potential and become great in their respective fields. Thomas Kyd was a great dramatist and a pioneer in the genre of revenge tragedy. He is well known for a Spanish tragedy that gives details of a revenge of a murder that takes place within the play. Thomas Nash, another playwright of the group, wrote plays on diverse themes of religion and social life. His famous works include Summer's Last Will and Testament and Isle of Dogs. George Peele was famous for his plays, Famous Chronicle of King Edward I and The Arraignment of Paris, which was written in 1581. Besides the university wits, another playwright who was very popular was Ben Jonson. He was a prominent member of Queen Elizabeth's court. Along with playwriting, he earned fame as an actor too. His well-known plays are Every Man in His Humour, Every Man Out of His Humour, Volpone and the Alchemist. He dealt with many social issues and also described the role of human beings within it. Amongst them all and a class in himself was William Shakespeare. Born in 1564 at Stratford-upon-Avon, William Shakespeare is considered to be one of the best dramatists in world history. His plays are popular even today, and they have been adapted into films as well. He has written a number of plays and also composed poetry. His famous plays are King Henry IV Part 1 and 2, The Two Gentlemen of Verona, Love's Labour Lost, The Merchant of Venice, Hamlet, Macbeth, King Lear, Othello, Measure for Measure, Cymbeline, Julius Caesar, The Tempest, and others. The death of Shakespeare left a void within the English sphere of playwriting, but some good dramatists who have written plays during this time too. Well known amongst them is John Webster. Webster was famous for his plays The Duchess of Malfi and The White Devil. Thomas Dekker was another famous playwright in the post-Shakespearean time. He is well known for the plays The Shoemaker's Holiday, written in 1599, and Satyromastics in 1618. The Elizabethan and Jacobean periods were considered to be very prominent times when the English stage was flooded with new talents. The Restoration period. After the great popularity of English plays that started during the reign of Elizabeth I, there was also a time when staging plays had been banned. In the year of 1642, the contemporary Commonwealth rule of England thought plays were obscene in nature and hence was not good for the general public. During this time, many prominent theatres in London were closed down. With the restoration of King Charles II in 1660, staging and writing of plays began again. Different kinds of plays were written and performed during this period. The main types were heroic drama, pathetic drama, and restoration comedy, which was also known as comedy of manners. John Dryden was also quite popular as a poet, wrote the play All for Love in 1677. Thomas Otway wrote Venice Preserved in 1682. The most popular category of drama during this period was the comedy of manners. Three dramatists, George Etheridge, William Congreve, and William Wycherley, were the leading ones in this field. Comedy of manners mostly dealt with urban themes and showed how the urban culture had polluted the human ethos. Through a sarcastic portrayal of characters like Foppling Flutter, they tried to show the shallow tastes of individuals and the lower standards of humanity. The notable plays in this category are The Man of Mode, 1676 by George Etheridge, The Way of the World, 1700 by William Congreve, and The Country Wife, 1676 by William Wycherley. The characters of these plays would bear a trait of their personalities. This period also saw the rise of the first woman dramatist, Aphra Behn, who gained fame through her work The Rover in 1677. In the 18th century, there was a wave of playwriting that tried to replace the element of sentimentality within the comedy of manners. Oliver Goldsmith and Richard Sheridan were the leading figures of this stream of anti-sentimental form of playwriting. Goldsmith's She Stoops to Conquer and Sheridan's The School of Scandal, 1777, had portrayed certain characters who were shallow in nature but were devoid of any form of sentiment. The Romantic period from 1798 to 1897 is largely seen as a time when playwriting was less and poetry was given more importance. The Victorian period. Starting from 1837, though the Victorian age was known for the growth of English novels, there were some dramatists too. Drama by this period had developed its other forms like musical burlesques, operas, farces, comic operas, and few others. Gilbert and Sullivan's comic operas were huge hits and ran into multiple performances. The Victorian period is known as the best time when development of English novels took place. Leading them all was Charles Dickens, who was born in 1812. He wrote a number of novels that spoke about the social lives of the English people of various classes. His famous novels are David Copperfield, The Tale of Two Cities, Martin Chuzzlewit, Old Curiosity Shop, Great Expectations, and many others. Another novelist of fame was William Makepeace Thackeray, who was born in India. His famous novel is Vanity Fair. Along with them, there were a few women novelists writing during this time. Novelists like George Eliot and Jane Austen are well known as they depicted the female perspective in their novels. Eliot's remarkable works are Adam Bede, Mill on the Floss, Middlemarch, Silas Marner, and others. Austen has written many famous novels like Pride and Prejudice, 1813, Sense and Sensibility, Persuasion, Mansfield Park, and others. During the modern period and towards the middle of the 20th century, novel and fiction writing had reached new heights. Some of the prominent novelists were James Joyce, Oscar Wilde, D.H. Lawrence, E.M. Forster, Virginia Woolf, George Orwell, Evelyn Waugh, John Galsworthy, Rudyard Kipling, and many others. The modern period. With the end of the Victorian period in 1901, there were dramatists working on diverse themes. The Irish theatre too was trying to create its own space within the English canon. George Bernard Shaw and J.M. Synge were the pioneers of Irish theatre. They mostly wrote about Irish myth and history in order to revive the Irish past. Shaw's famous plays are Man and Superman, 1902, Pygmalion, 1912, St. John, 1923. He was awarded the Nobel Prize in the year 1925. Synge's famous plays are Riders to the Sea and The Playboy of the Western World. He was instrumental in the establishment of Abbey Theatre, the centre of Irish dramatical activity. There was a series of other writers who were writing good plays during the 1940s and 50s. They include Terence Rattigan, Samuel Beckett, John Osborne, and Tom Stoppard. Samuel Beckett is known for his play Waiting for Godot. John Osborne, with his play Look Back in Anger in 1956, had presented the angry young men generation of the contemporary times. Tom Stoppard's Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, 1966, presents the two characters of Shakespeare's Hamlet in a different light. English fiction. Of all the forms within English literature, English fiction and novel writing gained a late start. Historians have dated the appearance of the first English novel with the publication of Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe in 1719 or Samuel Richardson's Pamela in 1740. But some of the earliest instances of novel writing is debatable. It is said that John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress in 1678 and Aphra Bane's Oronooko in 1688 are not proper novels, but are the earliest attempts in fiction writing. It was only in the early half of the 18th century that fiction writing gained a consolidated position. Along with Samuel Richardson, Henry Fielding, Lawrence Sterne and Tobias Smollett were amongst the early generation of novel writers. Henry Fielding is well known for his novel Tom Jones, which he wrote in 1749. It tells the story of Tom who rises from humble origins through the good intent of his heart. Lawrence Sterne's Tristram Shandy, written between 1759 to 1767, is a path-breaking novel in terms of the plot, characterization and overall presentation of the narrative. The story and life of Tristram had been presented in a mode that was unique to the reading public of England. The growth of moving libraries during this time was a phenomenon that contributed to the popularity of the novels. It brought a new urge to read storybooks. Besides these male authors, the first woman novelist who became a model for the later writers was Fanny Burney, who wrote novels like Evelina, Cecilia and Camilla around 1780s and 90s. These novels mostly showed how women should behave, dress, talk and live in the civil society. The Romantic period was a time of great poetry, but some good novels were written too. Some authors were Walter Scott and George Meredith. Walter Scott is regarded as the father of historical novels. He used a phase of history and gave it a fictional form. His famous novels are Ivanhoe, Old Mortality, The Lady of the Lake, The Heart of Midlothian. Most of these novels have historical content and are famous for the depiction of those times. They were written in the early half of the 19th century. George Meredith is known for the novels like The Egoist, 1879, The Tale of Chloe, 1879, and even Harrington, 1861. Conclusion. This chapter deals with the different genres of English literature. It gives our viewers and students the definition of the genres and their respective developments. For that purpose, we have chosen to discuss the development of English poetry, drama and fiction respectively. Each of these genres has been studied keeping the history in mind and how they have come down to us over the period of time. The study of genres within a time frame helps us in grasping a better knowledge of the subject of English literature. That is all that we had for you in this episode. We hope you enjoyed the session.